Meeting of JP&L to order. All members are present, and we're also joined by Clerk Sarah Breckman and Village Manager Rebecca Ewald. We have two items on the agenda for this evening. The first one deals with the open records request, and the second one we will get to subsequently. We have about 15 minutes allotted for this first portion. I'd like to, is Arthur Ursink available? Trustee Ursink?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do tonight, because we have spent as a village over a year discussing open records policy and action items and next steps. And Arthur, Trustee Ursink, for the tenure of his time on the village board, has been dealing with this in committee. So I thought maybe Arthur, if you could well, let me outline what's going to happen. I'd love for you to briefly give us a little synopsis, and then have a little time for questions from Melissa and others on the committee. And then we're going to go into a vote, hopefully. Does that sound fair?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. So take it away.
So a little synopsis doesn't do this issue very much justice, because it's something that we've talked about and argued about and philosophized about for a good solid year now. We've been through several different we've had several different I'd say issues in the community regarding open records, and I do think it comes down to maybe a couple residents that have this as an issue, their number one issue, and they're very focused on this issue. But yet I think the majority of our community kind of is aligned with what other communities are doing. We do have a very high rate of open records requests, but I'm not quite sure it greatly exceeds other communities in our area. A lot of the conversation revolves around making all of our records free, right, and accessible for everybody. That's the root of this question right now: is do we just open everything up and make everything free and accessible to the public? And that's kind of where the conversation left off. But I think I think where we were headed, and I think a good part of the conversation that I see as a middle ground for this, when you're offering records for free, it's not necessarily free because there's staff time involved. There's a lot of things that go into like getting the records organized and redacting certain records. So it's a much bigger issue. But I do think that we can find this common ground. We can find a common ground, and we can start to kind of maybe close the gap a little bit. And I think that common ground is the digitization of records. And I think that is a good direction that I see the village could head into to make things a little bit more open and accessible to residents. There are quite a few records right now that aren't digitized, especially like a lot of property information that I think we could easily. I mean, there's a lot of documents out there, so I think it would take some time, but I think it's something that we can really jump into and start working on. And I do think it's a really great idea to get there. So I think so it's just kind of summarizing. There's an interest. There's a community interest from certain people to see these records be totally free and open to everybody. But I think us as a community have to look at our community neighbors and have to take kind of pick and choose what works best for us. And from my perspective, and from listening to everybody that I've heard over the past year, I think really meeting somewhere in the middle and starting slowly would be the probably prudent decision. And that would be digitizing our records and figuring out what that is. And I think, and the thing that, I apologize if I'm going on too long here. I'm trying to make this as short as possible.
Actually, no, I'm going to just interject here for a second. I appreciate where you're going. And I was looking more for an overview, but I appreciate the considerations that you've also mentioned as far as what you'd like to see. So I think you've done your job in that. And how about we reserve any other comments for the comment period? Does that make sense? Unless there's something else you want to say that you've forgotten. I just wanted recap from Melissa on the committee structure and what's been happening, and also and then from there we can go ahead though.
I think the last point I wanted to make is the point that I tried to make in past conversations about digitizing records, is that we also need to be very conscious about infrastructure security, the security of those records, and just what it's going to take infrastructure wise to get all this stuff together and in a safe spot for our staff. So that's all I wanted to say.
I appreciate that. Don't mean to put you on the spot, Melissa, but please feel free to raise your hand or chime in if you have any questions. But do know that, and I'm not trying to curtail the conversation, but do know that we've spent a year on this. And I think that Arthur's summary is a great one. We have a couple of residents that have been asking for this. There are many municipalities that are struggling with the same struggles that we have. We are following best practices is what I think I heard as well. Is there room for improvement? Of course, that's what we're kind of here for, to look at, but we also have to consider staff and budget and finances and other things, and where this falls on the priority list as far as, do we want to be the, what do you call it? Do we want to be the pioneers in radically changing open records requests? I'm not saying yes or no on that, or do we want to, so anyway, go ahead.
One of the things I heard Arthur say was about the infrastructure and the kind of like safety and security. So I guess I'm not clear on what that component is. And maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe there's something lost in translation that I missed.
Well,
yeah, no, I could jump in real quick. So when I talk about just like cybersecurity, right? Just like if we're putting all these documents,
that's all you need to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense then. Yeah, I mean, my perspective is I think that we should always err on the side of greatest possible access for the public and the most minimal costs for public members of the public to access what essentially are their records. I know we do need to be mindful of staff time, but that's also part of the job. And to me, it's what is that kind of reasonable middle ground of, just like there's a threshold for when there's a cost to locate, if it's kind of above and beyond, normal time. To me, it seems like a fair, way to digitize is, kind of a cost assessment. If it's somebody has 2,000 pages of records that need to be digitized, yeah, that's something that there could be an additional cost assessed, and that would be very reasonable to me. But if somebody has, 5 or 10 pages of documents that could just be digitized, it seems like we should just do that and absorb that as part of the cost of doing the public's business, because, fulfilling open records requests is part of the job. And I've certainly been on the side of having to receive and process those. So I get it. Yeah, so I think I don't want to, belabor this. Like I said, my position is the greatest possible access and also minimizing costs for the public, as much as possible. And one thing though, I did have a question about, or maybe just I'll make a comment and so it goes. I definitely have concerns at the prospect of people bringing in their own equipment to make copies and things like that. That just seems to me like it's inviting problems. I would rather the village do that. So that's one thing I would just add, that it would not be my preference to have a system where, people can bring in their own, equipment to make their own copies or something, because I would worry about us as, the village as record custodians, if there was damage done to records, I would feel more comfortable having our staff make those copies. So.
Okay. So thank you for that. And for the sake of time, since we only have 15 minutes allocated for this, so correct me if I'm wrong when I summarize this, the integrity of the documents you're concerned about as well. And just so I think this, Arthur, that Melissa works in comms, and she's, as she mentioned, been on the receiving end of many of these requests in the past, and probably has an organizational structure or understanding about a lot of this that might be deeper than at least that I have. And that, but also what I've heard is that we want transparency, we want accessibility, we want public to be able to have access to information. We also want modernization of our record keeping. And these are things that have been ongoing discussions and initiatives, and we've spent money and a lot of village time on, not just for open records, but for a lot of documentation in the village, whether it be plots or, things that people need for, building a fence, etc. All of that modernization is imperative. It's also expensive. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We have to be creative, and we might need to look at some very creative options in order to accomplish and achieve a lot of these goals. But also, so hearing, so a variety of things. But what I want to do right now at this point was just get Rebecca's pulse on this, because she's also been integral in this whole conversation. However, I want to do also step back and say that we are not writing or looking to write policy for just a couple of people that have asked this for us, which it's been a very small amount of people. Okay. But that's our job, is to look at that and think globally, right? Because if you're asking doesn't mean many more don't want this. But anyway, I'd like to hear from Rebecca regarding some of her thoughts on this, and then maybe we can summarize and then move on to the next agenda item.
So we're at a point, I've been working on this, on the policy for this particular item. We are working with another group for the majority of it, and now we're transitioning to a new group. So thank you all for sharing kind of what your thoughts are, because it allows me to hear a pulse from the room in terms of what direction to head into. Irregardless of the decisions recommended by this group, I'm going to be moving forward to post a new standardized notice for all of our different departments that reflects our current fee schedule, because that's something that's important for us to do to make sure that we're consistent and up to date. That being said, for purposes of tonight, wanted to get guidance on a component of that if you are ready to weigh in, which would be for specifically on the question of, should the village be scanning in documents and making them available when they're only available at this time in a paper format. So, and we've canvassed just a number of different places, not only in Wisconsin, but in the US. And so there's different people have handled it in different ways. Some have scanned it in and provided it on a USB at no cost, or just the cost of the USB. Some have provided for reduced cost of scanning, and others have charged it similar to a copy. Our copier lease assesses it like a copy. When it charges us, it's just reduced by the paper cost. The bulk of the cost in that is really the staff time in order to make the copies. When you're working with a small batch, it's pretty insignificant. It's when the volume of documents gets larger and then requires refiling. So that was the narrow scope that I was bringing you at this point in time, but I'm welcome to answer any or all questions and take direction. If there's not consensus tonight, I'm going to go ahead and just post with what our current fee schedule relays at this point in time, and then we can also continue the discussion.
Okay, so a couple of points that I didn't hit on before. Thank you for that, Rebecca. And for the sake of moving on, and also, having some actionable items. One of the things I just want to address, Melissa, what you're saying before, and I completely agree, that sometimes it might, if there are a fewer amount of requests, it might seem like, let's just do this and move on. But I think you had also kind of alluded to that that's still a policy decision. So, when there's uncertainty and ambiguity and what is a few or, a small batch, we don't want to have to put that on staff to determine or to bring it to the board even. And, so we need to be clear in our policy decisions. I'm sorry, I'm not educating you. I'm speaking to everyone here. But so I guess what I'd like to do, and I appreciate the input that the village manager is giving us on the process and going forward and what they're going to do. And would it be recommended that we make a motion on that, Rebecca, or you had clearly stated that you're going to continue with that practice. So I'm fine. And I don't know about the other two members of this committee, but in saying that I approve going forward in that practice, and then we can still continue this discussion later on if modifications need to be made.
So we'll move forward with posting a notice that's consistent with our existing fee schedule, because it will take a recommendation from this group and then approval by the board to modify what we currently have in practice right now. What I think for purposes of today and given our time constraint, I think this was a good start in terms of introducing it to start the discussion. And then we can come back and focus more on some of the specific questions the next time.
Okay, then it sounds like we don't need a motion then.
No.
Okay. All right, any other feedback or questions or anything from the, if not, that's fine. We'll just move on to the next agenda item.
I would just add, I think it's in our interest to be digitizing these records. So I appreciate that's the approach that village staff is taking. That makes it easier on you all and on the public. You know, frequently people will make a request for all the open record requests and what somebody else got. So if you've got it digitally, then that makes it easier. So I say this is a good move for transparency and access.
I agree 100%. And I know that a lot of communities are struggling with this, by the way, including the city of Milwaukee and many other municipalities have open records requests that have been backlogged for many, like weeks, months, etc. So I really want to give a shout out to our village staff. I think you guys do an exemplary job, the best that I've seen around. And as the former president of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, hearing this discussion across the state and then also across the nation with the National League of Cities, I'm going to say we get an A+ for what we've done. But yes, we do have strides to make, and we might want to look, you know, going forward at maybe even a permanent IT position within the village, which would be, you know, creating another position, and et cetera. But that's for another time. So Arthur, unless you have anything else, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item.
I do not. I think it's a good direction.
Okay, fantastic. So it is 6:19 p.m. and we are moving on to the second agenda item, which is consideration of 2 spaces for the Parks and Open Spaces Committee. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to lead or if you'd like me to lead. I do, just so everyone's aware, I do have a couple of names that we have discussed and to put forward, but if there's anything else you want to add, Clerk Brockman, go ahead.
So basically, you're just looking at 2 spaces. So Libra Loest was recommended by JP&L last time to leave open spaces and go to Design Review Board based on her qualifications. And she has accepted that, and the board will be reviewing that approval tonight. And James Robinson has regretfully stepped down from the committee due to time commitments. So at this time, there's 2 openings. The applications are linked to the Open Spaces Committee portion of the agenda item in the discussion. And that's about it. So
Okay.
I discuss on who would you like to appoint.
Great. So I'll try to keep this quick and just update you, Melissa, because you weren't at the last committee meeting, and I'm glad to see you're doing much better. Arthur and I and Sarah and staff and others and you as well, have reviewed a variety, and we're so grateful to have as many people who are willing to participate in municipal government at a volunteer level. It's an enormous time commitment, and you know, you have to be motivated by it's a labor of love, right? Just kind of like serving on the board here. But so we were in a great position to have so many people apply for these open seats and for future or potential open seats. So we went through individually and as a body, a variety of applications. I will just give a little background. I have been have received a lot of outreach from many applicants across the board, not just these. And I've been pretty consistent in my messaging, which is, I appreciate this. I know it's not common practice in the past, not necessarily have we received input, but that is standard practice for most municipalities, where people who are very eager and interested in serving reach out to others and, you know, express not only their interest and ask questions. So I'm very grateful. And I know that not everyone knows that, so I'm not trying to shame anyone who hasn't done that or say that your input or your consideration hasn't been considered, because we did appoint a lot of people that none of us knew and none of us had spoken with, etc. And just so everyone realizes that we're talking about an applicant pool of, you know, if you go through the last 3 years, over hundreds of people. So that would be a full-time HR position for us as a village to proactively reach out, schedule interviews, etc. So I'm very grateful for those who have shown some initiative. So anyway, as Sarah had mentioned tonight, we lost two new members, but one is moving. It's a lateral transfer. She's moving to an open spot elsewhere that she originally wanted more than this one. And then another person who has moved on. So we have two open seats, and again, a good amount of applicants. And Parks and Open Spaces is a new committee. It's a joining of two previous committees. So anyone who served on those previous committees, Parks and Pet and Bike Safety, is that right, Sarah? Am I getting this right? Not crossing my lines again?
Yes, it was Parks and Pet and Bike. And then just to kind of interrupt there too, the committee did meet for the first time, and they kind of broke off into subcommittees. So the two spots that need to be filled are really for open spaces and pet and bike. So the Parks Committee is filled at this point, I guess, in the subcommittee standpoint. So just so you're aware.
Perfect. Yes. And then you and I had discussed this, and that information was in the packet, but thank you for reiterating that, because I had forgotten that prior to this discussion. So going with that, I'm just going to give a little background of, my thought process here. So I've re-reviewed all of the applicants, including some of the people including everyone who didn't even put this down. But for those who did show it, two names came to the top for me, and they both fit the needs of the committee, as Clerk Bruckman had just mentioned. One of them, Hannah Seegers. She is originally from Europe. She has a lot of great qualifications, and you all have her application and credentials. I had the good pleasure of speaking with her on the phone, and had other conversations with her, and I have never met her in person. I don't know her from Adam, but I am very impressed with not only her background, her skill set, her commitment to the village, and just bringing in more of a global perspective into this. And including not only bike and pet safety, multimodal, open spaces, conservation, environmentalism, and there are a bunch of other buzzwords that we could all throw out here. So I could probably go on for a long time and sing her praises. Hopefully I'll meet her in person one day. So that is one of the names that I am strongly, I would like for us to consider. And the other individual, his application we have, and he and I have spoken on the phone, and he did mention when he filled it out, and this brings us to a side point that we don't have to discuss tonight, but maybe we'll bring this up for a future item, or maybe which is kind of revising the whole application process, because some of the questions aren't completely clear to the applicants, nor do we provide examples. For example, what is your experience in, let's just say, hunting? Okay, that's not on there. But if it were, and then, you could look at that. If you're a hunter, you could still have a lot of questions around that. And if you're not, so anyway, I digress. But going back to, so it's Michael DeMarco. He's a Shorewood resident for a while. He brings he's particularly interested in open spaces. He is an avid biker and runner, so he's got the ped and bike. And I think for me, I will say this, ideologically, he and I are probably very different in a variety of regards. So I am very excited about what he will bring to this table and to this group. And I feel that functional diversity is incredibly important in this village. And we talk about it, equity, inclusion, and diversity all the time. So without divulging too much information, because we're talking about someone right now in an open setting, I'll just say this, that I am very impressed with what he brings. He followed up to some of the some of the shortcomings that he thought were shortcomings, not me, on his application initially, which I found that and he's also, both of these candidates have witnessed meetings and really want to participate, and said that they can commit to whether it's in person or virtual, or and the time constraints, which is very important. So that's where I'm going. I would love to get your feedback, you guys, but if I would also like to make a motion to recommend these two individuals. Oh, was there anyone that would like to speak? If not, I'll go ahead and make a motion.
It sounds like you've done your diligence. I'm looking over the applications. They, with your recommendation and just my basic review of the applications, I think these two individuals seem fit for the position. So I would vote in favor of supporting your motion.
As would I.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And again, yeah, I appreciate that. I will say that it was a hard decision. There are many great candidates out there, and I look forward to, and as we've seen, you guys, positions open up all the time, and we don't have to wait to fill them annually. And it's good for us to have these discussions. So I will ask this of the committee members, that as we go forward, to consider, we all have very finite amount of free time, right? But to continuously think about, who we would want. And we did this. We have done this, and we can continue to do this. Like, who's our bench? Let's keep our bench here. It's just so that when openings occur. So anyway, on that long diatribe, sorry, I had my motion here. I move to recommend Hannah Seegers and Michael DeMarco to the Parks and Open Spaces Committee. And forgive me, I don't have the motion in front of me, so if there's anything else that needs to be mentioned.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, Sarah, was that your job? Okay, opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Sarah, I guess, thank you, everyone. And Sarah, next steps, you'll reach out to both Hannah and Michael and let them know?
Correct.
Or just,
so they'll be placed on the July 6th agenda for village board approval.
okay, so
Yeah.
tonight under the consent agenda, this is not considered this evening?
It is not. So the last ones for Lieber Loest and that is on the village board tonight. So this one will go on the July 7th one.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I did see that and I was a little confused by that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right, good to know. So tonight under the consent agenda, this will be on the July consent agenda. Or okay, great.
And then I just need a motion to adjourn JP&L then if you're done.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Melissa. Arthur, second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passes unanimously unless Arthur chimes in.
Aye. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Okay, so I assume we're just staying right here for
Are we
public
just,
works?
are we just rolling right into it?
Correct. So now you're going to public works.
All right, so welcome to Public Works, everybody. So first on the agenda, we are, Leanne will update us on the vacant mechanic position and consider authorization to hire a special equipment operator. Is Leanne with us? I should say Director Butchlick. Sorry,
That's
Leanne,
all right.
I apologize.
No, I prefer that. Good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Could you walk us through this agenda item?
I certainly can. So you may recall that the 2021 budget did not include funding. It did not authorize the replacement of a mechanic position, one of two, that we had in previous budgets. Instead, an additional amount of money was allocated to the budget line item that we use to purchase parts or have vehicles or equipment serviced. And there was discussion at that point about doing a 6-month check-in, just so we could see how that was working. So this memo is an attempt to give you that information. There's quite a few numbers in here. We can get some really good data out of both our our payroll system and our accounts payable system. The one piece of data that I actually can't give you that I think would be very useful would be to demonstrate the lag time between a piece of equipment or a vehicle needing service and the point at which it's returned into use. We do not currently have a fleet software tracking system that is used at that level of detail. So I can only give you anecdotal evidence on that, and that would be that time has increased, which I don't think that's a surprise to anyone when you reduce the staffing level dedicated to fleet maintenance. But there's quite a bit of data in your memo. I think in general, you can see that the budget impact probably is, we could say, relatively minimal. In fact, we are tracking right on for the amount of money that was allocated in the vehicle maintenance account. So you'll note from the memo that in 2000, the actual budgeted amount was $90,000. In 2020. In 2021, that amount was $165,000. As I noted earlier, that was significantly increased in recognition of the fact that a larger amount of repair work would have to be outsourced. If you break it down on a per month basis, looking where we are year to date, we track at about 166,000. So that at this point looks quite well from a budgetary standpoint. You'll see the number of outsourced repairs is tracking significantly higher this year than we were. We're actually higher at this point in the year than we were in all of last year. If you break that down on a monthly basis, we're about 3 times higher than we were all of last year, or on a monthly basis, I'm sorry, we're about 3 times higher than we were last year. The cost of outsourced repairs, as you might expect, tracking significantly higher than we did last year. But again, none of that's really a surprise. We knew and expected that. I think the larger impact really is the operational impact. We are maintaining the same size fleet that includes, there's 32 public works and water and sewer utility vehicles, 34 items in public works and utilities that are classified as heavy equipment. That would be either something that is trailer generally, or something that can be driven but would not be considered a passenger type of vehicle. So 2 examples of that would be trailered equipment would be our leaf vacuums. An example of a heavy equipment that can be driven but wouldn't be a passenger vehicle would be some of our loaders. In addition, our mechanics maintain 11 police vehicles and 2 building inspection vehicles. As you might expect, the operational impacts, our salaries and wages line is tracking significantly lower than it was at this time last year. Again, totally expected. Our labor hours in the garage, we're actually tracking higher than I think you might expect. And that is in large part because there's a prescribed amount of work that needs to be done. That work doesn't change unless the size or the makeup of the fleet changes. So we have 1 less mechanic, but basically we have all of the same amount of work. And there are a number of tasks that, for safety reasons, particularly in our facility, require more than 1 person. It's noted later in the memo that many of our neighbors only have one mechanic, but many of our neighbors have what I would describe as current or more modern vehicle maintenance facilities. All of them have working lifts. All of them have indoor space that maintenance can be performed in. When we're kind of jacking up a truck, you can't allow one person to work in that condition alone. That wouldn't be safe at all. So we need to have hands assisting. We need to have observers. We need to be able to put the mechanic in a position where he can do the work safely. So oftentimes that means pulling other staff from other tasks to either provide that safety observation or to provide a second set of hands where a particular task needs them. So I think that an interesting figure that we've included here are the number of employees who are working in vehicle maintenance. In 2019, which was the last year that we, for a full year, had to train mechanics, we had 4 total employees that worked any vehicle maintenance hours. And so most typically that was the the fleet foreman who would step in when one or other of the mechanics was on vacation or on a sick day. In 2020, our chief mechanic left just over halfway through the year. So we finished out the year with 1 mechanic. We had 6 different people who worked in vehicle maintenance, providing that, that second set of hands, that safety observation. So far in 2021, we've had 7 employees who have performed that role. So, the great part about that is that we have a relatively large pool to draw from, and we can easily do that. The challenge there is that when that person is in the shop helping the mechanic, they're not doing the job that they were actually hired to do. So it might be a route collector, it might be one of the utility guys, it might be a forester, but no matter who they are, if they're in the garage helping the mechanic, they're not doing a core service that we're expecting them to provide. So that's a challenge. Similarly, the hours have jumped. 2019, we had 27 hours total for non-mechanics working in the garage. Last year, we had 110 hours for the entire year, and through the end of May in 2021, we had 124 hours. So, a relatively small percentage when you're talking about a 20-80 hour work year, but still has an impact on some of the other tasks and duties that we are expected and do provide. So one of the things that makes this a little more challenging and a little more interesting is that we also have an electrician position that's vacant, as you all know. Because these 2 positions tend to be very highly skilled, they have historically acted as each other's backup. So we have always had in the last decade or more, we have had one of the mechanics trained as the electrician's backup, so that if a circuit goes out or we have either a street light or a traffic signal that's knocked down due to an accident or an errant driver, we do have someone who can come in and kind of button things up enough that everyone can continue on their way. Conversely, our electrician, our most recent electrician, actually came to us with some heavy equipment mechanic experience. So he was a great person to kind of step in and fill that role when it was needed. when our chief electrician took a job in Brown Deer last year, our chief mechanic, our then mechanic stepped into the chief mechanic role, and we started training him to provide that necessary backup to the electrician. Now that our electrician has retired, we really have one person who's our now chief mechanic, but the only mechanic. He's essentially performing the duties of 3 different job positions. And we're left without any type of real backup, either for him or for the electrician position when he is not on the clock. As you know, we are currently working with an electrical contractor who is providing many of those duties that our previous electrician did. However, there's still a fair amount of time that's necessary to be able to gather information and diagnose any electrical issues so that we can use the electrical contractor's time most efficiently. I don't think any of us want to be paying them on an hourly basis just to figure out what's wrong, right? We want to be able to give them as much information as we can so that they can come prepared to do the job. And the person at this point who is really best versed to gather and relay that information is our mechanic. But again, with only one mechanic, when he's not in the shop, there's maintenance that is being deferred. There's preventative maintenance that's not being done. If it is a critical issue, then clearly we have to move him, and we triage and prioritize. But it does have lasting effects and impacts on how efficient we can be and our service delivery. So while the mechanic and the electrician are 2 separate positions and really 2 separate action items or consideration for the village board, I give you that information just so that you understand that while they're separate, they are, they're linked. And there's, at this point, there's very little we can do to untangle them. For the foreseeable future, those 2 kind of walk hand in hand. So as I mentioned in the memo, the impacts of the current staffing situation are twofold. When the mechanic isn't in the shop, whether that's because he's doing another duty, electrical duty, or he's on vacation, repair of vehicles and equipment is delayed. This impacts our daily maintenance and operations in DPW, and oftentimes it has a more significant impact on the police department. Typically, when their vehicles or equipment go down, that becomes our #1 priority. If there is no one in the shop that day, it isn't addressed until the mechanic returns. I think we've talked in the past about how nearly every task or every process that the DPW performs or services provides is mechanized. We've consciously made that decision over decades because typically a process that uses equipment or vehicles is far more efficient than one that is human powered. So that was a conscious decision on the village's part over the last several decades. But it also has, that mechanization requires maintenance of those vehicles and equipment. When vehicles and equipment aren't operating, we can't perform services. We certainly can't perform them efficiently, and sometimes we can't perform them at all. The second impact of the mechanic staffing situation relates to the actual vehicle maintenance and the labor hours. If the mechanic is not in the garage, or if the vast majority of his time is spent addressing equipment or mechanical failures, that leaves far less time for preventative maintenance. A check of the village's capital asset sheet shows that the police department, planning and development department, DPW, and utility vehicles and equipment have an approximate replacement value of nearly $6 million. That's an incredible investment that the village has made in this fleet. And that investment requires preventative maintenance to preserve and extend its lifespan and to maximize that. The current hours that we can dedicate to preventative maintenance is not on par with the value of that asset. And we need to be able to provide all of the necessary preventive maintenance to maximize that tax dollar investment that we've made in the fleet. So, that really kind of brings us to, here we are, what might be next. I think that we would certainly admit that the village with its size does not need 2 mechanics every day. But it does need 1 mechanic every day in order to operate efficiently and to keep those vehicles and equipment moving and rolling. So we make a note in the memo that we will continue to advocate and request that electrician position be filled so that we can allow the mechanic time to focus all of his available hours on fleet maintenance. And so we are requesting that you consider a suggestion that this 19th staff position, which is that mechanic position that wasn't filled in the 2021 budget, be reinstated. We know how difficult it is to find skilled workers. I think we've talked about that in the realm of hiring an electrician. And what we would propose is that the position actually be posted as an equipment operator, which is a job classification that several of our other employees hold. That ideally the candidate would be one who has a high mechanical aptitude, someone who is mechanically inclined and could provide some very, very basic backup in the shop when the mechanic needs an extra set of hands, or when he is off and we need to be able to, like I said, triage that equipment. The restoration of that position is also really important to the pool of employees that we have available to us to respond to winter maintenance issues. This past winter was a challenge when you're down people, and we've talked about that in the past, and that is a bit of a separate conversation, but our current winter operations service level and service expectations are really geared toward the level of staffing that we have and staffing that fully so that we can provide all of the winter services that people have come to expect. So this is an update that we've kind of morphed into a request for consideration. You are agended to consider authorization to hire, but that would be a recommendation to the full village board at the next meeting. And that was relatively quick, and I'm sure you have lots of questions. So I will stop talking and allow all of you to take the floor.
Thank you, Ann. That was great. I apologize, guys. I'm just at Specter Field right now, just wrapping something up. So, but
oh, I thought that was for me. No.
I like that. That's a really great snapshot of what's going on, and it just be upfront, transparent. I was, very supportive. I think at the time of you guys hiring that second mechanic, just because after the tour and after seeing what your staff has to work with, it is a challenging environment. We do have a very outdated facility, and it's not easy. So, so Leanne, after listening to all of that, what you're kind of boiling it down to is you want basically somebody like with mechanic experience a potential, electrician experience. Did I hear that right? Somebody that could be like more of an assistant to, potentially assistant to both? Or maybe you just can clarify what exact position
Sure.
you would be looking to fill here.
So ideally, what we'd like to do is to be able to hire someone who we would classify as an equipment operator, which is really our sort of catch-all position, if you will. Someone who works in a variety of areas, but certainly has skills and aptitude to operate and handle the larger equipment that we have in our fleet. Ideally, that person would also be someone who was highly mechanically inclined, handy, if you will, and could provide some assistance in the shop. Not a certified mechanic, not necessarily anyone even with formal background as a mechanic or past experience as a mechanic, but someone who certainly knows their way around a toolbox and can provide some of that assistance. In the time that I've been in the position, I can think of a good handful of people that I've had the privilege to work with who were not mechanics, but came to us with some experience in different realms, or perhaps they were in the service, and just really had a great mechanically oriented mind and could really take care of equipment and step in and fulfill that role. But we're not a mechanic and never were paid to be a mechanic. There are people like that out there, and really that would be what we would be looking for. If that worked, then certainly we would look at making them one of the cross-trained positions to handle some of the more basic electrical duties. But the focus really would be, initially at least, helping out in the vehicle maintenance area.
And just one last question for me. Do you have like applicants on file, or do you have anybody specific, or is this still something we need to go out and search for applicants?
We would definitely need to search for applicants. We did have a couple of people contact us last year when when we thought that mechanic position was opening up, but that's nearly a year ago, and I think we all are very familiar with how the job market is working these days. I'd be real surprised if any of those people were not actively working currently. So we would definitely advertise.
Yeah, thank you. Trustee Bachhorst or Baldoff, do either of you have questions for Leanne?
I don't. I mean, I support this. I think it sounds like this position is needed. So I don't have any questions, and I know that fleet management isn't always the sexiest aspect of local government, but it's incredibly important. That's, as you mentioned, a very significant asset that the village is responsible for, and helps, facilitates a lot of our staff doing their jobs safely and efficiently. So it's important to invest in that, and I fully support this.
And trustee, thank you. Or anything else, Melissa? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you if that's the case.
Nope.
Perfect. Trustee Ursink, is it okay if I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, so I won't rehash everything that you mentioned and Melissa mentioned. I completely concur. Just a little, it has been, it's been challenging, and Department of Public Works is an incredibly large and needed organization. What we all feel it when there's a big snowfall, right? Everyone expects their streets to be cleaned. When their trash to be picked up and their sewers to work, and all the different things that we don't typically see and we take for granted on the daily, but really are part of our existence and quality of life. So we've had this discussion many times. I fully support the motion that's stated in the packet. So I will go ahead and look for one of you two to make that.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Bachhorst. So if there's nothing else, I would love to make a motion on this, if that's all right. So I move to authorize the hire of a special equipment operator to replace the second DPW mechanic position, be forwarded to the village board for consideration. Now, I should add that we should probably add a budget or salary number in there, or
It's
a
not
figure.
required, but it is nice. Sorry to interrupt, but it's not required. So that let's hold that up.
I guess it's not required, but it's something that I know Trustee Stokerbrand has always brought up, that I think is always I think it can be a valid point. But I mean, I assume Leanne probably has a number in mind. Do you, Leanne?
Well, actually, I think with the committee's approval to move this forward, then we'll sit down with Mark
Okay.
and come, and provide that information certainly for the full board discussion.
Fantastic. So I will just stand by my motion without
I'll
budget
second it.
numbers.
Or I will second it, and I will add that we can always change our minds when the numbers come forward. So I am approving the concept, not the quantity, the number that will be generated at the next meeting. And I think that's kind of necessary for us to understand that when this comes to full board. Leanne, you please parse that out and mention that you didn't have that number for us, the committee, in case you come with like $300,000,
There is a number, an estimate in the memo, and it's one that I feel is, seems appropriate for the position. So, I feel comfortable moving this forward, and then waiting for Leanne and Mark to come with the final estimate. But based on what's in the memo, it seems like a very reasonable cost.
So Melissa, would you be comfortable with amending that to just include with the proposed range, and that any additional money would be subject to full board consideration, whatever it is?
I'm comfortable with that. I think what it has in the fiscal note is a total fiscal impact of $100,000 between the wages and benefits. I don't know how we typically, would couch that in language
Just like
for.
that. Just like that.
Okay.
Actually.
All right. So should
Do
we
you want me to
make
make a new motion, or?
It's a friendly amendment if we all agree that
Okay.
that includes that. Arthur?
Yep. I
Great.
agree.
Okay.
So then, Sarah, could you just add that to the motion, the numbers, the fiscal impact numbers?
Actually, I'm doing the notes, so I will certainly do that.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed.
Oh, are there any nays, abstentions? I'm just kidding, sorry, just being him.
All right. So I'm just on my phone here, guys, looking at the agenda. Maybe you could help me out. That seems to be it for Public Works. So I will take a motion to adjourn Public Works.
So
So moved.
moved.
Second.
All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. That was a great one. Thank you,
All right.
Leanne.
Thank you, Leanne, thank
Aye.
you, Arthur, thank you, Melissa, and everyone else.
Thank you.
So Committee of a Whole, we will move over there to a new Zoom link for Committee of a Whole.
Correct. New Zoom link for committee of the whole.
Okay. Fantastic.